Hey there, bookworms. Welcome to my immersive novel narration channel. In this episode, I'm reading *A Porter walked into a top finance summit. Seconds later, a billion-dollar empire collapsed *, completely unabridged. No skip chapters in crystal clear human narration. The pacing is laid back and so immersive it'll pull you right in. No need to strain your eyes flipping pages. Just close your eyes, zone out, commute, or wind down before bed, and let yourself binge the story like an audio drama. Total eye relief and crazy soothing. The moment Su-Han cranked the centrifuge to 12,000 RPM, the glass shield shattered. Crimson culture medium splattered across the wall, running down the pristine white laboratory tiles like a gruesome arterial bleed. 36 hours of non-stop experiments, over 1,000 sets of cell sample culture data. All of it destroyed. He pulled off his goggles, wiped the medium from his face, and before he could even open his mouth, the fire door behind him swung open from the outside. Jiang Boning stood in the doorway in a sharply pressed white lab coat, holding a document with a red letterhead. Behind him were 4 security guards and 2 compliance officers in black suits. "Dr. Su, someone has reported you for falsifying core data." When he said it, his expression was one of regret, his tone heavy. His brow furrowed with just the right degree of concern, like a good leader reluctant to enforce discipline. But the way he laid the document on the lab bench gave everything away. His fingers were long, his nails neatly trimmed. He pressed his fingertips against the edge of the paper with the steadiness of a surgeon lowering a scalpel. That wasn't regret. That was calculation. Su-Han stared at him. The two of them had worked together since their days in the joint MIT lab, 12 years in all. They'd co-authored 7 papers in top-tier journals and pulled countless all-nighters. Su-Han thought he knew Jiang Boning the way he knew his own right hand. But at this moment, he saw something in Jiang Boning's eyes that he'd never seen before. Something thin, cold, as if looking through a one-way mirror. The other man could see him clearly, but he couldn't see through the other man. "What data?" Su-Han's voice was calm. "The Phase 3 clinical data for Project Cambrian." Jiang Boning pushed the document forward. "The part you were responsible for. There's a problem with the sample size bias. The whistleblower says you deliberately excluded 30% of the control group cases to make the experimental group's data look better." He paused, lowering his voice even further. "Senior brother, I didn't want to believe it either. But compliance has verified everything. The whistleblower's evidence chain is complete." Su-Han looked down at the document. When he flipped to the second page, he saw the original whistleblower letter. The signature at the bottom was neat and clear, in handwriting he recognized. It belonged to Zhong Qi, the doctoral student he had mentored for 3 years. Attached behind the letter was a thick stack of materials, each page bearing Zhong Qi's handwritten signature and fingerprint sworn testimony, claiming she had personally witnessed Su-Han repeatedly enter the data processing room alone when the lab was empty, using his administrator privileges to alter the core data. Su-Han stared at those signatures. That girl had just turned 26 2 months ago. The book he had given her still sat on her lab desk, its flyleaf inscribed with a dedication. "To the future best bioinformatician in China." "Where is Zhong Qi?" he asked. "She voluntarily disclosed everything to the ethics committee. She has now entered the witness protection program and cannot be in contact with you for the time being." Jiang Boning answered with a tone of regretful resolve, as if reading a verdict that could no longer be overturned. Su-Han suddenly felt like laughing. Witness protection program. 2 months ago, he had just submitted the final report on Project Cambrian to the Institute. This research, a gene therapy for neurodegenerative diseases, would, if approved for clinical trials, directly threaten the core interests of Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals, backed by Jiang Boning, in the Parkinson's drug market. Ruiheng's flagship product held 63% of the domestic market share, with annual sales exceeding 4 billion yuan. And Jiang Boning's wife, Zhao Minji, was none other than Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' VP of R&D. Before he could speak, hurried footsteps echoed from outside the lab. Institute Director Zhao Weijuan's booming voice tore through the hallway. "What's everyone crowding around here for? Out of my way." Zhao Weijun was 56, bald, with a beer belly and a voice like it came with a built-in megaphone. He squeezed into the lab, took one look at the culture medium splattered all over the wall, then looked at Su-Han. In a matter of seconds, his expression completed a transition from shock to fury to heartbroken grief. It was the smoothest emotional shift Su-han had ever seen, so seamless that every micro-expression flowed into the next without a single crack, as if rehearsed. Su-han, you have disappointed me beyond words. Zhao Weijun slammed another document onto the lab bench, the pages scattering everywhere. Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals just called. They are terminating all collaborative projects with our institute. 8 projects, 200 million in funding. All gone. Because of your fraud scandal. He turned to the colleagues gathered around, his voice hoarse and indignant. Effective today, Su-han is suspended, pending investigation. His lab is sealed, all data archived. No one may access anything without the ethics committee's approval. Su-han stood amid the shattered glass from the centrifuge, his feet in the sticky culture medium, his nose filled with the mingled stench of ethanol and scorched protein. He looked at Zhao Weijun, at Zhang Boning, at the colleagues who had once discussed research with him late into the night and now averted their gazes. Something suddenly came to mind. 3 years ago, Zhao Weijun's daughter, Zhao Yutong, fresh out of a Cambridge PhD, had walked straight into a job in Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' Strategic Investment Department. 3 million a year salary, plus stock options and dividends. All of that had been in the newspapers at the time. Only nobody had connected it to Su-han's experimental data back then. Don't rush to clean up. Zhao Weijun's voice echoed down the hallway. The ethics committee people will be here any minute. Su-han didn't remember how he walked out of the lab building. He only remembered that the sun that day was blinding, its searing light like a dull blade, cutting painfully into his skin. When he walked out the institute's main gate, Oldly the security guard was dozing off, the radio beside him playing kunku opera. Oldly cracked one eye open, glanced at him, then shut it again. That iron bar gate slammed shut behind him with a loud clang, the lock snapping into its slot, a sound like a nail being driven into his spine. 15 months later, Su-han was driving a beat-up old Wuling minivan, delivering packages in the urban-rural fringe. The cargo hold was crammed with cardboard boxes. A faded protective amulet his mother had sent from his hometown dangled from the rearview mirror. His phone held a screenshot of a group chat from the research institute. Zhao Weijun had posted. Su-han expelled from the party, PhD revoked, transferred to judicial authorities. Below it was a string of likes and support the organization's decision. He hadn't been transferred to judicial authorities. The ethics committee's investigation had dragged on for 9 months and ultimately concluded, insufficient evidence. No case to be filed. But no one cared about that news, just like no one cares about the reversal of a story that has already gone cold. His name had been completely erased from academic circles. His papers were successively retracted by his co-authors. His inbox was stuffed with retraction notices from journal editorial offices. Polite, icy, each one identical to the last. Only one person had ever sent him a message. It was a WeChat voice message from his mother. The old woman was illiterate. She used handwriting input, and every message took her forever to compose. This one had taken 3 minutes. Son, I put our old house in the hometown up for sale. For when you come back to stay. Su-han didn't reply. He put his phone in his pocket, fired up the van that felt ready to fall apart at any moment, and merged into the morning rush hour traffic. Another 3 years passed. Deep underground in the ring-shaped tunnel at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, a technician in a radiation suit was performing routine maintenance. His job was tedious. Check the cooling system of the quantum computer, record the temperature readings at each node. The quantum computer, codenamed Norn, was a next-generation computing platform jointly developed by 7 European countries. In theory, it could simulate the state of particles in the first microsecond after the Big Bang. In practice, it spent most of its time idling like an engine with 1,000 horsepower and no racetrack. The technician yawned, swiping through temperature readouts on his touchscreen. Everything normal. Then he saw a folder. The folder sat quietly in the root directory, named backup_2024, created at 4:03 a.m. on a certain day 3.5 years ago. The technician assumed a colleague had mistakenly saved a temp file and casually clicked on it. Inside was a single encrypted zip file. The password was a 6-digit number. He tried CERN's universal maintenance code. No luck. He tried dates. No luck. He thought for a moment, then typed in the factory serial number of this very quantum computer. The archive unzipped. Inside was a 1,200-page PDF. The technician read only the first 30 pages before his hands started shaking. He grabbed his walkie-talkie, his voice tight. "Get Professor Fletcher to the control room. Now." Clyde Fletcher was CERN's chief scientific officer, a Princeton PhD in high-energy physics, and a member of the European Academy of Sciences. He sat in front of that 1,200-page document for 9 hours straight. He skipped lunch, skipped dinner, and refilled his coffee 6 times. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bloodshot but ablaze. "Who uploaded this?" he asked. The technician shook his head. "Check the logs." Fletcher took off his glasses and rubbed his eye sockets hard. "Check that early morning 3 years ago. Who logged into Norn?" They checked. The logs showed that at exactly 4:03 a.m. that morning, an account had remotely accessed Norn's superuser privileges via an encrypted tunnel, uploaded this folder, and logged off. The account's registration information traced back to a defunct Swiss email address, which was tied to a deactivated UK phone number. Every lead vanished deep into the iceberg, but there was a signature page inside the folder, containing just one line. Project name Cambrian. Principal investigator, Su Han. Affiliation, Institute of Biophysics, Chinese Academy of Sciences. Fletcher did not know Su Han, but he recognized the value of the data inside that folder. It was a complete theoretical framework for a gene therapy delivery system, combining quantum computing with adeno-associated virus vector design, capable of precisely predicting and circumventing immune rejection at the molecular level. If this theory was validated, it would utterly rewrite the fundamental logic of gene therapy. And now here it lay, sleeping quietly on CERN's servers, like a treasure abandoned on a deserted island. "Find him." Fletcher stood up, shoving his chair backward 3 meters. "At all costs. Find this Su Han." At that very moment, 8,000 kilometers from CERN in Beijing, Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' annual shareholder meeting was underway in the grand ballroom of the China World Trade Center Tower 3. Zhao Mingji, clad in a pristine white Dior pantsuit, stood before a holographic projection screen, presenting the clinical data for Ruiheng's next-generation Parkinson's gene therapy drug, Rucangning. Her voice was confident and compelling, the numbers dancing on the screen artfully designed to please the eye. In the audience sat Zhao Weijun and his daughter Zhao Yutong. Zhao Weijun had just retired from his post as institute director the previous year, and was now a senior advisor to Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals, drawing an annual salary 17 times his old pension. Jiang Boning sat beside his wife Zhao Mingji, scrolling through his phone with his head down. The data on the holographic screen vanished. At that exact moment, every single phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. Different models, different carriers, but the same push notification. The headline was just 8 words. Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' core patent invalidated. Zhao Mingji's voice died in her throat. She spun toward the holographic screen, which had already switched to a breaking financial news bulletin. A sharply dressed anchor was reading a script at a rapid clip. According to a just-released announcement from the Swiss Federal Patent Court, Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' gene vector patent, numbers 2023-01892, has been declared invalid. This patent serves as the technical foundation for Ruiheng's core product, Rucangning. The immediate consequence of its invalidation is that Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals will be unable to prevent competitors from manufacturing the same class of drug. Following this news, Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' stock price has already plunged 50% in pre-market trading. Analysts expect a circuit breaker may be triggered upon market open. Zhao Mingji's face drained from rosy to ghostly white in 1 second. She snatched her phone from the table and dialed a number, her fingers trembling. "Get legal to initiate the emergency protocol," she screamed into the receiver. But her voice was drowned out by the uproar from the shareholders below. Jiang Boning bolted upright, his chair tipping over backward. He didn't bother to write it, striding quickly toward the side door of the ballroom. The side door opened on its own. A man in a dark gray trench coat walked in. His hair was much longer than 3 years ago, his face roughened and darkened by wind and sun, But his eyes were unchanged, calm, deep, like an ancient well that no one could muddy. Behind him walked 4 lawyers in black suits. The middle-aged man at the front was someone Zhang Boning recognized. Kong Xiaohe, a Peking University Law School graduate from a decade ago. Now a partner at McKinsey, one of the world's top global law firms, specializing in cross-border commercial litigation. Kong Xiaohe pushed up his gold-rimmed glasses and spoke in a detached, businesslike tone. Mr. Zhang Boning, Ms. Zhao Mingji, Mr. Zhao Weijun. On behalf of my client, Dr. Su Han, and representing the Deep Blue Foundation, I am here to formally notify your company that you are suspected of infringing upon 3 international patents held by us. The adeno-associated virus-targeted delivery technology, the quantum-assisted protein folding algorithm, and the neuron-specific promoter sequence. The relevant filings have been submitted via the electronic litigation system of the International Court of Justice in The Hague as of this morning. The case numbers have been made public. Please take note. Zhao Weijun shot up from his chair, the blood draining from his face so fast it left his skin ashen. He pointed a trembling finger at Su Han, his lips quivering. All he could squeeze out were 2 words. You. Su Han didn't look at him. His gaze swept past the crowd and landed on Zhang Boning. Less than 5 meters separated them, the space between littered with scattered speech notes, overturned chairs, panicked shareholders, and journalists hammering furiously at their keyboards. Zhang Boning's mouth opened. He wanted to say senior brother, but those words were like a fishbone lodged in his throat. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't spit them out. Su Han looked at him, the corner of his mouth lifting almost imperceptibly, so slight it was barely visible, but it was the curve of a predator baring its teeth in the dark. Long time no see, Su Han said, his voice neither loud nor soft, yet perfectly audible to everyone present. Your patent? Written with my code. Your viral vector? I designed it. Your clinical data? I fabricated it. Oh wait, your data doesn't contain my code, because you don't know how to write it. He turned around, facing the financial reporters who were still frantically snapping photos, and added in a flat tone. By the way, let everyone know. The true core architecture of Project Cambrian completed experimental validation through CERN's Norn quantum computer early this morning. The entire dataset has been recorded on a blockchain notarization system. Immutable, globally verifiable. The so-called Rukangning that Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals spent 3 years and over $1 billion to cobble together is, essentially, a crippled version of Cambrian. And it's missing the most critical safety check module. In other words, your drug has a 7% probability of triggering a fatal immune storm. That sentence landed like a bomb into deep water. For a moment, an eerie silence gripped the ballroom. Then chaos erupted. People screamed. Glasses shattered. Several fund managers holding massive blocks of Ruiheng stock swarmed Zhao Mingji, surrounding her, gesticulating furiously with red faces. In the midst of the crowd, Zhao Mingji swayed, stumbled over her own silk scarf, and toppled backward, her head striking the metal corner of the lectern with a sickening thud. No one moved to help her. Her husband, Zhang Boning, stood in the corner, his face ashen, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. He watched Su Han's retreating figure and suddenly yelled, "Senior brother! You can't!" Su Han stopped at the door. He didn't turn around, only swiveled halfway, revealing half his face. The contours of that face were still the same as 3 years ago, but the edges were harder now, as if sculpted by 3 years of wind and sand. He said, "When you called me senior brother, did you ever think about those 36 hours you destroyed? About the experimental records soaked to pulp in culture medium? About Zhongqi, your witness? And the email she sent me last year?" His voice remained calm, so calm it was like he was reading a piece of stage direction unrelated to himself. "She memorized that testimony because you made her. She went into witness protection because you forced her. And then you shipped her off to Switzerland, gave her an assistant position where she'd never touch core technology. You thought that would shut her up forever." Su Han reached into his trench coat and pulled out a neatly folded sheet of printout paper and unfolded it. It was a printout of an email, the sender's name Zhongqi. The last paragraph had a deep indentation where Su Han's fingernail had underlined it. He read the sentence aloud. "If I ever get a chance to start over, I want to become the kind of person Professor Su is. Having read the last word, Su-han folded the paper, put it back in his pocket, turned around and continued toward the door. Behind him, Jiang Boning let out a hoarse, guttural roar. He charged 2 steps after Su-han's retreating back but was blocked by 2 lawyers from Kong Xiaohe's team. One of them addressed him, neither servile nor overbearing. Mr. Jiang, please restrain yourself. What you are about to face is a transnational intellectual property infringement lawsuit. I suggest you save your energy for the courtroom. Su-han pushed open the ballroom doors. Outside, the corridor was carpeted thick, and sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, stretching his shadow long behind him. He walked into the light, his shadow trailing behind, like a man who had just surfaced from the depths of the ocean. The opening bell on Wall Street rang out at precisely 9:30 a.m. New York time. Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals ADRs on the Nasdaq triggered a circuit breaker in the very first minute of trading, halting for 15 minutes. When trading resumed, the stock continued to plummet, losing 73% of its value before midday. Over $30 billion in market capitalization evaporated. The institutions that had shorted Ruiheng made a killing that day. The most conspicuous among them was an offshore fund called Deep Sea Capital, which had established massive put option positions with 5 times leverage just 3 days before Ruiheng imploded. Kong Xiaohe, on the phone with Su-han, remarked in a dry tone, Deep Sea Capital's current unrealized profit is approximately $900 million. Meanwhile, back in Beijing after Zhao Mingji was taken away by ambulance, Zhao Weijun sat alone in the empty ballroom. In front of him was the holographic screen still displaying the stock price chart. The red numbers cascaded downward like a waterfall, staining his face crimson. His daughter Zhao Yutong tried to pull him away, but he shook her off violently. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, roaring into the receiver. Find out. Investigate that Su-han. What the hell has he been doing these last few years? The person on the other end was silent for a moment, then replied in a cautious tone. Mr. Zhao, we already checked. For the past 3 years he's been delivering packages. But at the same time we traced over $20 million in digital asset transactions through his crypto wallets. The network nodes he used cover Switzerland, Singapore, the Cayman Islands, and Japan. His identity has been cross-verified by financial institutions in 17 countries, each time under a different alias. And the most troublesome part, his Deep Blue Foundation is actually controlled by a holding company registered in Luxembourg. The layer above that is a trust in Malta, and if you trace further up, it's a foundation in Vanuatu. Simply put, his ownership structure is a firewall composed of 27 layers of offshore entities. On our end onshore, we can't touch a thing. Zhao Weijun's hand, still holding the phone, slowly dropped to his side. The numbers on the holographic screen kept flickering. The red waterfall kept cascading. His reflection was drowned in a sea of digits, like a drowning man making one final struggle. Jiang Boning flew to Geneva that very night. Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' patent litigation in Switzerland required a response before the Cantonal Court of Geneva. He brought 8 lawyers and 4 suitcases crammed full of documents. He didn't sleep a wink the entire flight. Sitting in his first-class seat, he stared blankly at a glass of red wine. One thought churning over and over in his mind, how had Su-han done it? Those data 3 years ago had been destroyed right in front of his eyes. He had seen the culture medium splash the wall, seen the petri dishes shatter across the floor. The day Su-han was suspended, Zhao Weijun had sealed the lab. Jiang Boning had personally supervised the formatting of the hard drives and the destruction of the paper records. He thought that project had been erased from the face of the earth, as cleanly and utterly as that man's name had been erased from every academic journal. He was wrong. At the immigration checkpoint at Zurich Airport, Jiang Boning was stopped. 2 customs officers in dark blue uniforms examined his passport repeatedly for a long time, then politely informed him, pursuant to a provisional measures order from the International Court of Justice in The Hague, the Swiss Federal Office of Justice had imposed travel restrictions on Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' de facto controllers and their immediate relatives. The legal basis for this measure was arcane, citing provisions on jurisdictional preservation in intellectual property infringement cases under the Swiss Federal Act on Private International Law, as well as the Hague Evidence Convention on Cross-Border Evidence Preservation. In other words, He couldn't just leave Switzerland as he pleased. The Swiss medical license he had obtained years ago to facilitate attending conferences and project collaborations did him no good at all. The customs officer took the license, his expression becoming even more inscrutable, murmured something into his walkie-talkie, and then informed Zhang Boning that the Swiss Medical Association had already received a notification from the European Medicines Agency, initiating a qualification review procedure regarding his suspected involvement in academic fraud and commercial deception. He could lose his authorization to practice as a doctor and researcher within Europe at any moment. Zhang Boning stood in the glass cubicle of the immigration lane, facing the formulaic smiles of Swiss customs officers and the enormous Swiss national emblem on the wall behind them. His phone vibrated madly in his pocket. Notifications popped up one after another. Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals suspended from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Zhao Mingji taken from the hospital by economic crimes investigators. Zhao Weijuan's door in Beijing knocked on by the disciplinary commission. Ruiheng's German partner announcing the suspension of all joint projects. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration launching a safety investigation into Rukangning, the worst-case scenario being a lifetime ban from the U.S. market. Zhang Boning scanned the messages as they slid onto his screen and then closed his eyes. He leaned against the glass wall, feeling a chill surge from deep within his marrow. It was not fear. It was a dawning, belated realization. He had thought he was the hunter. He had thought he had cleanly and efficiently pulled in the net. He had thought that 3 years ago he had pinned the biggest fish to the chopping board. But he only now understood that in those 3 years, he had not even glimpsed the fish's shadow. That fish had been swimming in the deep sea all along, growing where he couldn't see it, growing into a whale. Dawn over Lake Geneva always comes with a thin veil of mist. The water was a grayish blue, and the distant snowcap of Mont Blanc shimmered with an almost translucent pink in the early light. Su Han stood on his hotel balcony, hands resting on the railing, watching a white yacht glide slowly across the lake. His phone rang, an encrypted line. He answered and heard a clear female voice. "The Swiss Federal Patent Court hearing is today. Are you sure you want me to appear?" The voice was very pleasant. Every word enunciated perfectly. Su Han smiled. "You're the Chief Compliance Officer of the Deep Blue Foundation. If you don't go, who will?" "Understood." She acknowledged, then paused slightly. "Zhao Mingji's attorney just sent an email. They want to settle. They're offering 5 billion. Rejected." Su Han's voice had no hesitation whatsoever. He hung up and continued gazing at the lake. Footsteps sounded behind him. Kong Xiaohe emerged carrying 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. Su Han took a sip and frowned. "It's cold." Kong Xiaohe shrugged helplessly. "You were on the phone for 20 minutes. Su Han didn't respond, simply resting the coffee cup on the railing and gazing across the lake at the distant dome of the Palais des Nations. The Palais des Nations houses the headquarters of the World Intellectual Property Organization. In 1 hour he would be delivering a keynote address there, as the founder of the Deep Blue Foundation, on the open-source sharing of gene technology. He had finished writing the speech on the plane, without having anyone polish it. "Lao Kong," Su Han suddenly said. "If 3 years ago on that morning I hadn't gone to the lab, hadn't turned on that centrifuge, what do you think things would be like now?" Kong Xiaohe was silent for a moment, then said, "You'd be Zhang Boning." Su Han turned to look at his lawyer. Sunlight illuminated half of Kong Xiaohe's face. The other half remained in shadow. Kong Xiaohe was 45, his hair already half white, making him look a decade older than he was. 10 years ago, when he graduated from Peking University Law School, he had already signed an offer from a top Boston law firm with an annual salary of $180,000. But that same year, his mother was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. Without a second thought, he tore up the offer and stayed in Beijing, accompanying his mother through her final 8 months. In those 8 months, he drained his savings, racked up 170,000 yuan in debt, and at the end, held his mother's urn in the funeral home for a very long time, not shedding a single tear. Su Han had met him by chance, when Kong Xiaohe was providing pro bono legal aid to a graduate student whose advisor had stolen their research. In court, he had verbally dismantled the 3 lawyers on the opposing side. Su Han had watched that trial. When court recessed, he walked up to Kong Xiaohe and said, "Attorney Kong, I'd like to buy you a coffee. Kong Xiaohe looked him up and down and said, You look like a delivery guy. Su Han laughed. You look like you haven't eaten in 3 days. Same here, actually. The two of them shared a meal at a Lanzhou hand-pulled noodle shop across from the courthouse. Over the meal, Su Han laid out the whole story from beginning to end. When he finished, Kong Xiaohe slapped his chopsticks on the table and said, I'm taking this case. But I have one condition. I don't want your legal fees. I want to be a partner in Deep Blue. Now Kong Xiaohe was the Asia-Pacific partner at McKinsey, one of the world's elite law firms, renowned for its cross-border commercial litigation. The previous year, McKinsey had ranked in the top 3 globally in revenue. In Kong Xiaohe's office hung a piece of calligraphy, written by Su Han. Over the abyss all paths are clear. The strokes were crooked, hardly elegant, but the brush force carried a reckless, unyielding energy. Su Han patted Kong Xiaohe on the shoulder. Come on. Time to go to the Palais des Nations. The grand conference hall at the Palais des Nations was packed. Health officials, pharmaceutical executives, patent lawyers, and editors of academic journals from over 60 countries filled the seats. Journalists standing in the aisles aimed their cameras at the podium like a forest of long guns and short cannons. Su Han, wearing a simple white shirt and black trousers, no tie, walked onto the stage, and the entire hall fell silent. This wasn't the usual silence of a conference hall. It was a tense silence, a silence of an entire room collectively holding its breath. They all knew who this man was. They all knew that just 3 days earlier, he had single-handedly detonated Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals, a $40 billion pharmaceutical giant, reduced to ashes within 72 hours. Su Han had prepared no PowerPoint. He switched on the microphone and began his speech in a very matter-of-fact tone. He talked about the history of gene therapy, starting from the first clinical trial in 1990, the discovery of adeno-associated virus vectors, the breakthrough and limitations of CRISPR technology, and why the biggest bottleneck in gene therapy, immune rejection, had never been completely overcome. Then he got to the point, beginning to present the core architecture of Project Cambrian. On the large screen, one by one, appeared protein-folding pathways simulated by quantum computing, highly efficient neutralizing antibody escape mutants screened by directed evolution, and a distributed computing model capable of predicting an individual's immune system response in real time. It was content worthy of 10 papers in top journals, and he covered it in under 40 minutes. When he reached the last slide, he paused, looked out at the faces staring at him, and suddenly said, This is the complete architecture of Cambrian. Today I am making it entirely open source. The conference hall was dead silent for 3 full seconds. Then it erupted. The Pfizer representative shot to his feet, knocking over his coffee cup. Novartis patent lawyer was already typing furiously on his phone. In the front row, a health official from the African Union covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes reddening. Several reporters in the back raised their hands at the same time and shouted the same question. Dr. Su, are you certain it's fully open source? Including the core algorithm. Including the core algorithm. Su Han's voice remained clear through the cacophony. All technical documentation, algorithm code, experimental data, and clinical protocols for Project Cambrian are being open-sourced today on GitHub under an MIT license. Any individual, any institution, any country is free to use, modify, and distribute it without paying any patent fees. There is only one condition. Any drug using this technology must be provided free of charge to patients in low-income countries. He paused, looked at the faces displaying a spectrum of expressions, and added slowly, If anyone thinks this is too radical, I would ask you to cast your minds back 3 years. 3 years ago, on the day I was let out of my laboratory, all my data was sealed, all my work destroyed, all my rights stripped away. If my code had been open source back then, do you think Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals could have used a piece of patent paper to lock everyone outside the gates of treatment? The hall fell silent. It was the silence of something having struck home, everyone digesting the weight of his final words. Su Han didn't say anything more. As he stepped down from the podium, applause erupted behind him. Not everyone applauded. The representatives of the pharmaceutical giants sat stone-faced, unmoving. But many, many more stood up. The African health officials stood. The South Asian public health experts stood. The young scientists from non-profit research institutions in the back rows clapped until their palms stung. An elderly Swiss professor with a shock of white hair hobbled up to Su-Han on his cane, shook his hand, and said a long sentence in a thick Zurich accent. Su-Han caught the last line. Das ist das Ende der Pharmamonopol. This is the end of pharmaceutical monopolies. Su-Han clasped his hand and shook his head slightly. No. This is the beginning. That evening, back in his hotel room, he opened his laptop. The Project Cambrian repository on GitHub had been forked 30,000 times within the first hour. 8 hours later, it surpassed 100,000, claiming the #1 spot on GitHub's global trending chart. In the list of stargazers, he saw scholars from MIT, Stanford, Cambridge, Tsinghua. He saw the account of Médecins Sans Frontières. He saw official accounts from the health ministries of several African nations. And he saw an ID. He clicked into it and found that this ID had starred several gene therapy open-source projects before. Its most recent login was just a few hours ago. The user bio read, Zhong Qi, postdoctoral fellow, ETH Zurich. His finger paused on the trackpad. Then he scrolled further and saw the latest post on the user's profile page. It was one line. Professor Su, I can finally understand your code. Thank you. Su-Han leaned back in his chair, staring at that line for a long time. Outside the window was the Geneva night. City lights shimmered on the lake, scattered like diamond chips on black velvet. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. It rang twice before connecting. Xin Yubai? I need you to come back to the country. A lazy young man's voice came through the receiver, groggy with sleep. Boss, do you know what time it is? 2 a.m. Zurich time. Su-Han glanced at his watch. It was indeed 2 a.m. Sorry, he said, with absolutely zero apology in his tone. The remaining assets of Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals need someone to clean them up. Their overseas subsidiaries still have a few things of value. Their debt structure also leaves a fair amount of room to maneuver. You're a Wall Street guy. You know this stuff inside and out. Silence on the other end for 2 seconds. Then Xin Yubai's voice turned alert and excited, like a firecracker with a lit fuse. You should have led with that. I'm booking the earliest flight. Xin Yubai was the youngest core member of Su-Han's Deep Blue. 26 years old, 2 months younger than Zhong Qi. He'd tested into Tsinghua University at 16, transferred to the Wharton School at 18, joined Goldman Sachs' quantitative trading desk at 20, and resigned at 24 after refusing to build a trading model for a derivative product suspected of fraud. After that, he was blacklisted by Wall Street for 2 full years. In those 2 years, not a single financial institution would touch him. He survived by tutoring and writing code for people online, living in an unheated garage in New Jersey, so cold in the winter that he had to warm his keyboard with a hairdryer just to type. Su-Han found him through a dark web forum. At the time, Xin Yubai was in the middle of tracing a hacker who had tried to breach his server back to the hacker's apartment in St. Petersburg, Russia. He had even pinpointed the exact apartment number. Su-Han asked if he wanted to join a project that might change the world, and might also land him in prison. Xin Yubai thought for 3 minutes, then replied with a single word. In. Su-Han hung up, then dialed another number. This time it rang much longer before connecting. Su Qingyin's voice came through. She sounded awake, as if she hadn't slept yet either. There was a faint raspiness in her voice, as if she'd had more than 1 cup of coffee. The spokesperson requires sleep at 2 a.m, you realize. You weren't asleep, Su-Han said. You're working late. I can hear you typing. Su Qingyin was silent for a second, then let out a soft laugh. The sound, transmitted through an encrypted satellite signal, was slightly distorted but still unmistakable. You win. So what do you need? Kong Xiaohe told me about Zhao Mingji's settlement offer. I rejected it. But she's not going to give up. She still has hidden offshore assets, estimated at around 700 to 900 million USD, tucked away in shell companies in the British Virgin Islands and Belize. I need you to use the Su family network to dig out the exact locations of these assets. A brief silence on the other end. Then Su Qingyin answered in a very calm, very professional voice. By noon tomorrow, there will be a complete offshore asset map in your inbox. Su-Han thanked her and was about to hang up, but Su Qingyin stopped him. Su-Han, she said his name, and something else suddenly crept into her voice. Not flirtation, not sentiment, but a very earnest gravity, as if she were verifying a set of coordinates. "That speech you gave at the Palais des Nations today. I watched the live stream. When that African health official cried, I saw her tears on the video. What you've done is far more important than bringing down Ruiheng. I'm proud of you." Then she hung up. Su-han stood by the window, phone in hand, not moving for a long time. Between him and Su Qingyan, there had never been any sugary words. They were both people who were extremely restrained, even clumsy when it came to expressing emotions. But in that sentence just now she had said, "I'm proud of you." He suddenly felt that those words were more grounding than all the applause in the Palais des Nations combined. At noon the next day, an encrypted file arrived in his inbox right on schedule. Su Qingyan's family-controlled Su International had deep roots in the global shipping and logistics sector for decades, and had long-standing relationships with law firms and accounting firms in every major offshore financial center. This report had mobilized 3 law firms, 2 accounting firms, and a commercial investigation agency. The human resource cost was incalculable, yet less than 12 hours had passed between his phone call and the email arriving. He opened the email and saw a densely detailed relational map, laying out Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' hidden assets in the British Virgin Islands, Belize, Seychelles, and the Marshall Islands with absolute clarity, account balances precise down to the last dollar. At the very bottom of the map was a handwritten note from Su Qingyan. She had scribbled it on her tablet with an Apple Pencil, taken a screenshot, and sent it over. The handwriting was neat and forceful. "The registered agent for these shell companies is the same Cayman Islands law firm. I had someone check their internal system. Zhao Mingji used her mother's name as the ultimate beneficial owner. The old lady is 83 this year, living in Hangzhou. The irony is staggering." Su-han finished reading, forwarded the file to Kong Xiaohe, and appended a single line. "Submit this asset map as supplementary evidence to the Swiss Federal Patent Court and the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Simultaneously send it to China's State Taxation Administration and Hong Kong's Independent Commission Against Corruption. Copy to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. I want her pursued and recovered in 4 jurisdictions at once." He clicked send. Leaning back in his chair, he watched the data stream scrolling across his screen, a feeling akin to fitting the final piece of a puzzle washing over him. Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' last hidden compartment had been exposed to the sunlight. That afternoon, Shun Yubai landed in Zurich. He didn't even stop at his hotel, dragging his suitcase straight into Su-han's temporary office. He was wearing a wrinkled hoodie, his hair a bird's nest, but the way he flipped open his laptop was crisp and efficient. Within 3 minutes, he had a heat map of Ruiheng's global assets spread across his screen. "Good news and bad news," Shun Yubai said, clasping his hands over his knee, his expression hovering between excitement and seriousness. "Good news. Ruiheng's debt structure has a massive crack. 2 years ago, they issued $500 million in convertible bonds. The bond covenants include a cross-default clause. If Ruiheng defaults on any other debt, bondholders can immediately demand that Ruiheng repurchase all the bonds at face value plus penalty interest. The evidence in Su Qingyan's report is enough to trigger that clause. Plainly speaking, we can buy up those bonds on the market right now for cents on the dollar, then force Ruiheng to buy them back at full price." "And the bad news?" Su-han asked. Shun Yubai's smile faded a little. "The bad news is Zhao Mingji still has a chunk of cash. Yesterday, she moved $70 million out of Belize through a shell company in Dubai. Tracing that money will take time, and Dubai's financial free zones are notoriously uncooperative with cross-border investigations." Su-han was silent for a moment. Then he opened his phone and scrolled to a number he hadn't contacted in a very long time. He hesitated a few seconds, then dialed. The phone rang more than a dozen times. Just as he thought no one would answer, a hoarse, deep male voice came through the receiver. "Su-han? I thought you were dead." The voice carried the signature roughness of a heavy smoker and drinker. The tone was crass, but there was a faint, unspoken note of concern underneath. Gao Zheng, former head of the Financial Crimes Investigation Unit at Interpol. 3 years ago, he had offended the wrong people during an anti-corruption operation, been sidelined internally, and taken early retirement. Now he ran a dive club in Marrakesh, Morocco, and drank whiskey more frequently than water. But he still knew every dark money flow path in the underworld like the back of his hand. "Lao Gao, Su-Han skipped all pleasantries and got straight to the point. I need you to help me track a $70 million transfer from Belize to Dubai. The funds originate from Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' offshore accounts. The current controller is Zhao Mingji. A low, cold laugh came through the phone. Zhao Mingji? That bitch who sold fake drugs. Gao Zheng paused. Su-Han heard the flick of a lighter, the sound of a deep drag on a cigarette, and then the slow hiss of exhaled smoke. Her money's not in Dubai. The Dubai account is a decoy. That 70 million actually went through an underground bank in Hong Kong, broken into over 200 trade payments, mixed into the interbank settlement system in Singapore. The final resting place is Luxembourg. Su-Han's brow twitched, but he didn't interrupt. Gao Zheng continued. Listen closely. There's a private bank in Luxembourg called Copenhagen Private Wealth Management. Name sounds like a Danish bank, but it's actually run by a bunch of Russians who specialize in concealing dirty money. Zhao Mingji opened a trust account at that bank under her son's name. The beneficiaries are 3 foundations in Liechtenstein, and the controller of those foundations is still her. A huge loop just to make it impossible to trace. If I'm right, she's planning to move that money in batches into bearer gold certificates in Switzerland. Once it becomes physical gold, good luck getting it back. Su-Han had his phone wedged between his ear and shoulder, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. Her trust account. How much is in it now? Counting that 70 million, around 800 million yuan total. Su-Han's typing fingers stopped. He recalled his call with Su Qingyan the night before, when she'd estimated Zhao Mingji's offshore assets at roughly 700 to 900 million US dollars. The figure Gao Zheng just gave was far lower after conversion. That meant a significant portion of the assets might have already been moved or hidden deeper. He voiced this concern to Gao Zheng. Gao Zheng was quiet for a moment, then suddenly slammed his hand on the table, the sound making Su-Han's eardrum buzz through the receiver. I remember now. Zhao Mingji's husband, what's his name? Zhang Boning, Su-Han said. Right, Zhang Boning. He holds a Swiss medical license, you know that. Gao Zheng's voice became urgent. That explains it. Swiss law allows holders of a medical license to set up medical trust accounts under certain conditions. These accounts are subject to far looser oversight than normal financial accounts, practically a legal vault. Zhang Boning must have transferred the assets under his name into a medical trust. If you want to investigate that trust, just the administrative approval process within Switzerland alone will take 6 months. Su-Han leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling, mind racing. 6 months. Everything would be stone cold by then. But it took him less than 10 seconds to think of a solution. No need to investigate, he said slowly. We'll make him fork the money out himself. Gao Zheng was stunned on the other end. What do you mean? If Zhang Boning knows he's about to face massive litigation damages and criminal fines, he'll try everything to move his assets. A medical trust account already exposed to an investigation won't feel safe anymore. He'll move the money to somewhere even more hidden. The transfer process itself is our window to trace it. Su-Han's voice was unhurried. What we need to do now is make him feel the fire burning at his heels. Gao Zheng was silent for 2 seconds, then let out a hoarse, roaring laugh. There was a hint of admiration in that laughter, and a hint of a chill. You're still the same as you were back then, you little punk. Other people play chess 3 moves ahead. You play 10. Fine. I still have people inside that bank's internal system in Luxembourg. The moment the money moves, I'll let you know first thing. After hanging up, Shen Yubai, who had been listening to the entire exchange, thoughtfully propped his chin on his hand and suddenly asked, Boss, how do you even know a character like Gao Zheng? Su-Han stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the distant snow-capped mountains. 4 years ago, when I was still a researcher, Gao Zheng came to our institute investigating a transnational illegal human experimentation case. He was being blocked by his higher-ups and couldn't proceed. I gave him a crucial piece of data. That case later brought down the leadership of an entire provincial health department. Gao Zheng made enemies because of it, and was forced into early retirement. Shen Yubai let out a low whistle. He'd heard the broad strokes of what happened 3 years ago. Zhang Boning's betrayal, Zhao Weijun sealing the lab, Zhao Mingji's Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals pulling the strings behind it all. But he hadn't known that Su-Han, even earlier, had been helping someone else fight another behemoth lurking in the shadows. "Boss," Shin Yubai said in a tone that mixed awe and exasperation. "Are you like born with a trouble magnet? Does trouble just follow you everywhere?" Su-han turned around, a faint smile surfacing on his face. In the twilight, the smile looked a little tired, but the light in his eyes was bright. "Trouble doesn't find me," he said. "I choose not to hide." After receiving Su Qingyin's email, Kong Xiaohe's legal team worked through the night to refine their litigation strategy. On top of patent infringement, they added 2 new causes of action. One for unjust enrichment, demanding Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals return all commercial profits gained through the infringing technology. The other for commercial fraud, targeting the couple Jiang Boning and Zhao Mingji for using fraudulent data to mislead investors and regulators. The morning the complaint was filed at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, Kong Xiaohe personally flew to The Hague and gave a brief interview to several international media outlets on the steps of the Red Brick Peace Palace. His words were restrained, but one sentence was turned into a headline by major financial media around the world. Some companies think intellectual property is a battering ram to smash the labs of their competitors. But they forgot one thing. A fortress is most often breached from within. Zhang Boning saw this news from his hotel room in Zurich. He hadn't left his room in days. The curtains were drawn tight. The room smelled of stale instant noodles and cigarette ash. In front of him were 3 laptops and a tablet, all screens filled with lawyer letters, court summonses, and negative media coverage. His eyes were bloodshot, his lips cracked. He held a fountain pen in his right hand, repeatedly drawing the same symbol on a sticky note. A circle with a triangle inside. It was a pattern Su-han had casually drawn in the lab back in the day, which they had jokingly adopted as the unofficial logo for Project Cambrian. He didn't know what he was drawing nor why. The doorbell rang. He woodenly got up and opened the door. Outside stood his Swiss lawyer, Hans Muller, a white-haired man from Zurich whose expression was perpetually stern. Attorney Muller set his briefcase on the table and pulled out a document, speaking in an utterly emotionless tone. "Mr. Jiang, the International Court of Justice in The Hague issued a global asset freeze order against you and your wife this morning. All your accounts in Switzerland, Luxembourg, Singapore, and Hong Kong have been frozen. Your Swiss medical license has been urgently revoked by the Swiss Medical Association on the grounds of obtaining professional qualifications through unethical means and using them for commercial fraud. Furthermore, the Swiss Federal Office for Migration has initiated your deportation proceedings." Zhang Boning listened. His expression didn't change in the slightest. It was like a sheet of paper that had been soaked in water. All the emotions bled out, leaving only a blurred pallor. His lips moved, forcing out a very soft sound. He won. Attorney Muller looked at his client, was silent for a moment, then placed the document on the table, stood up, picked up his briefcase, and headed for the door. At the doorway he paused, his back to Zhang Boning, and said, his voice low and solemn, "Mr. Jiang, I have practiced law in Switzerland for 37 years. I have seen many people lose cases, but a person who loses his dignity, you are the first I have ever seen." The door closed. Zhang Boning sat alone in the dark room, the 3 computer screens still flickering before him, torrents of negative information cascading down. He reached for the fountain pen and realized that the circle and triangle symbol he had been drawing on the sticky note had, at some point, been punctured by the nib. The ink had torn through the paper and left a deep blot on the desk, like a drop of black blood. Zhao Mingji received the copy of the Global Asset Freeze Order in the detention center. She had already been held for 7 days on suspicion of commercial fraud and stock market manipulation. In those 7 days she had barely slept. Her hair had turned half white in the span of a few days. The makeup was long gone from her face, revealing the aging, sagging skin beneath. She flipped through the freeze order page by page, her fingers trembling more and more violently. Attached to the order was a list of assets, pinpointing the locations of her hidden assets around the globe with absolute clarity. 3 trust funds in the British Virgin Islands, 5 shell companies in Belize, 2 bank accounts in Seychelles, a registered yacht in the Marshall Islands, and even a fixed deposit account in Singapore she thought she had already closed. Every balance was accurate down to the last dollar, with a margin of error under $1. She flipped to the last page and saw an addendum. The signature line read, Chief Compliance Officer, Deep Blue Foundation. Below it was a handwritten signature, neat and forceful, Su Qingyan. The addendum contained just one line, but that line was like an icy blade, piercing her pupils from the page. The above asset information has been simultaneously submitted to the State Taxation Administration of the People's Republic of China, Hong Kong's Independent Commission Against Corruption, and the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Your mother, as the nominal holder of certain accounts, may be listed as a related subject of investigation. She is 83 years old and resides in Hangzhou. Please carefully consider whether you wish to continue concealing the remaining assets. Zhao Mingji let out a piercing, anguished wail. She tore the document to shreds, the fragments flying through the air, landing on her hair, her shoulders, the concrete floor. She clawed at her own hair, her fingernails digging into her scalp. Blood seeped from between her fingers. But she felt no pain, because something stronger than pain was exploding inside her chest. It was despair. She remembered that back then, when she had opened those offshore accounts under her mother's name, she had just randomly filled in an identity detail. Never, not once, had she imagined that one day someone would follow that thread all the way to that old residential building in Hangzhou and knock on her mother's door. Her mother's memory was already failing. Sometimes she couldn't even recall Zhao Mingji's name. But every afternoon she still sat on her balcony, basking in the sun, waiting for her daughter to come home for dinner. The lights in the detention center went out. She shrank onto the iron bed, pulling her knees to her chest like a turtle flipped on its back. In the darkness came her broken, halting sobs, a sound that didn't seem to issue from her throat but rather to seep from the fissures in her bones. She cried for a very long time. Finally, in a hoarse, slurred voice, she said something. Boning we never should have. Zhang Boning's deportation proceedings completed all formalities within 48 hours. The efficiency of the Swiss Federal Office for Migration was notoriously slow, but this time it was so fast that even Hans Muller was surprised. Clearly, pressure had been applied from high places. Zhang Boning was escorted by 2 immigration officers to Zurich Airport and placed on the earliest flight to Beijing. As the plane took off, he gazed through the porthole at the shrinking Swiss landscape below, the lakes and mountains blurring and fading beneath the clouds. He thought back to 10 years ago. That year he and Su Han had just met at the joint MIT lab. The two of them had argued over an experimental protocol in the discussion room for an entire night, until both their voices were hoarse. Su Han had suddenly pulled a bottle of water from his bag and handed it to him, saying, "Drink first. We'll keep arguing after." He had taken the water, unscrewed the cap, and taken a sip, then watched Su Han pick up a marker and start redrawing the experimental flowchart on the whiteboard, saying as he drew, "You're right, this part should be changed like this." In that moment he had thought, "This is a man worth being friends with for a lifetime." But afterwards everything changed. Ruiheng Pharmaceuticals' commercial interests rose like a wall between him and Su Han. Zhao Mingji would murmur into his ear on the pillow, "If your senior brother's technology falls into someone else's hands, Ruiheng is finished." Zhao Weijun would clap him on the shoulder and say, "Xiao Jiang, a wise man knows how to adapt to the times." Step by step he had walked forward. Every step felt like just a temporary compromise, just a necessary cost, just something anyone else would have done. Until the moment he placed that fabricated whistleblower material on Zhao Weijun's desk. Until he watched with his own eyes as Su Han was led out of the lab building. Until he uttered that line he'd rehearsed countless times before the ethics committee. "I can testify that Su Han did indeed tamper with the data." At that step he had walked into the abyss. He just hadn't known it at the time, thinking it was the shortcut to the light. The plane began its descent. The nightscape of Beijing spread out beyond the porthole. A million glittering lights, rivers of traffic, like a vast, dazzling spiderweb. Zhang Boning pressed his face against the cold window glass and looked at the city he had once thought he could conquer. He had not conquered it. It had swallowed him. After the plane landed, Zhang Boning was intercepted by 2 men in plain clothes beside the baggage carousel. They showed their badges. A joint task force from the China Securities Regulatory Commission and the Ministry of Public Security. When he was taken away, he didn't struggle at all. He simply lowered his head, extended both hands, and voluntarily placed his wrists together. In the black van in the parking lot, he saw a familiar figure. Zhao Weijun was also sitting in the vehicle, handcuffed just like him. Zhao Weijun's hair had gone completely white, and his beer belly had deflated considerably. He looked like a skin sack with the stuffing pulled out. The two of them sat side by side in the back seat, a criminal police officer between them. Zhao Weijun turned his head and glanced at him. In those eyes there was no hatred, no remorse, only a profound, absolute emptiness. Then Zhao Weijun turned back, staring at the streetlights rushing past outside the window. He mumbled the same phrase over and over. That key, I should never have given it to him. Jiang Boning closed his eyes. A month later, Su Han returned to Beijing. This time it was in his capacity as the founder of the Deep Blue Foundation, invited back by the Ministry of Science and Technology to participate in the construction of a national-level gene therapy platform. When his plane landed at Capital Airport, he didn't use the VIP channel. He queued in the economy line with all the other passengers. Some passengers recognized him. People took photos, whispered to each other. Some even gave him a thumbs up. He walked forward with a calm expression, as if those focused gazes were just so much irrelevant noise. At the end of the corridor, Kong Xiaohe stood waiting, and beside him was a woman in a black trench coat. The moment Su Han saw her, his steps faltered. Su Qingyan looked even leaner than she had on video calls. Her collarbone showed above the trench coat's collar, its line as sharp as a blade. Her hair was shorter than the last time they'd met, cut to her shoulders, making her face look even more crisp and capable. When she saw Su Han, she didn't wave, didn't rush forward to embrace him. She simply stood there quietly, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly in a restrained but genuine smile. There was something in that smile that made Su Han's heart, the heart that had been pressed down into the deepest place for 3 years, stir faintly. Welcome home, Su Qingyan said. Su Han stood before her, thought for a moment, and realized that all the words he had prepared couldn't make it out. In the end he only managed 2 words. You're thinner. Su Qingyan paused, then laughed. This time she laughed aloud, not loud, but the mirth reached her eyes. That's your opening line after 3 years of holding it in? I rehearsed a lot of words on the way. Forgot them all. Then stopped thinking. Su Qingyan naturally reached out, took the handle of his suitcase from him, and turned toward the parking lot. Come on. Academician is waiting at the restaurant. He had someone slow cook a pot of old hen soup, said it's to replenish you. He also said if you dare be late today, he's giving your chicken leg to Kong Xiaohe. Su Han followed her, and suddenly felt that the Beijing winter was not as cold as he remembered. In his first year back in Beijing, Su Han accomplished a great deal. He assisted the Ministry of Science and Technology in setting up the nation's first open-source collaboration platform for gene therapy. He licensed the core technology of Project Cambrian to 7 domestic pharmaceutical companies, all using a cost-plus pricing model, bringing drug prices down to 1/10 of imported equivalents. He also delivered a TED Talk titled Can Stolen Technology Be Taken Back?, which surpassed 10 million views on YouTube within 3 days. That child, Gu Sun, sought him out. The video of Su Han's speech at the Palais des Nations had been forwarded countless times by domestic media. Gu Sun had stumbled across it on Bilibili and wept halfway through watching. He wrote Su Han a very long email, his wording cautious and tentative, like a stray cat testing whether its owner still remembered it. The moment Su Han received the email, he called him. The call connected, and there was a long silence on the other end. Then came the sound of a teenager's sobs, for years of suppressed tears breaking free. Professor Su, I'm sorry. Back when you were in trouble, I didn't dare to stand up. Su Han cut him off. You did nothing wrong. You were just a kid back then. His voice was gentle, but every word carried an unyielding force. I'll help you arrange your studies. What direction do you want to pursue? Neural repair, Gu Sun answered without a moment's hesitation. Su Han smiled. All right. I'll have Shen Yubai open a GitHub account for you. Start by learning programming from him. All those fundamentals I taught you back then, you haven't forgotten them all, have you? On the other end of the line, Gu Sun shook his head furiously, then after a few shakes realized the other person couldn't see him, and practically yelled, No! Professor Su, I remember it all. Jiang Boning's sentence came down quickly. Life imprisonment, deprived of political rights for life. Zhao Mingji was sentenced to 20 years on multiple counts. Zhao Weijun, due to his advanced age and having proactively disclosed some issues during the investigation, was sentenced to 8 years. Su-han received the notification on the afternoon the court handed down the verdicts. He did not attend the sentencing. Instead, he traveled to a small, bleak northern city called Zhangjiago. It was a grimy industrial town under a leaden sky. The snow in the streets churned into black slush by car tires. He found the old residential building, its hallway crammed with bicycles and cardboard boxes, faded spring couplets peeling on the walls. He climbed to the 5th floor and knocked on the door. The door opened, and an old woman with a full head of white hair stood within. Her eyes were cloudy, her lips dry and cracked. She looked at Su-han, looked at him for several seconds, then her face broke into a radiant smile. "Minji, you're back. I saved some dumplings for you." Su-han stood in the doorway, a lump suddenly blocking his throat, unable to speak. He looked down at the old woman, Zhao Minji's mother, already deep in dementia. She couldn't recognize her own daughter, nor could she recognize that the stranger before her was someone her daughter had wronged. It took him only 5 seconds to make a decision. He did not tell the old woman the truth. He crouched down, took her wrinkled hands in his and said softly, "Minji asked me to come see you. She's overseas on a business trip. It'll be a long time before she's back." The old woman was so happy her eyes crinkled into slits. She tugged his hand, pulling him inside, chattering away. Come in quick. The dumplings are leek and egg, your favorite." Su-han sat in that cramped living room and ate a plate of dumplings with the old woman. She kept piling more into his bowl. He ate every single one. Before leaving, he tucked a bank card under the placemat on the dining table. Inside was enough money to hire a good caregiver for the old woman. The account name was listed as Zhao Minji. The password was her birthday. Walking out of that building, Su-han stood in the snow and let out a long breath. The white mist dispersed in the air, then quickly vanished. He did not look back. 10 years later, the global landscape of gene therapy had been completely redrawn. The patent walls that pharmaceutical giants had once clutched so tightly were dismantled piece by Project Cambrian's open-source license. The average annual cost of medication for rare disease patients plummeted from millions to tens of thousands. The accessibility rate of gene therapy drugs in low-income countries rose from less than 3% to 57%. In its annual report, the World Health Organization used a phrase to describe this transformation: the Cambrian explosion. In biology, the term refers to the geological period over 500 million years ago, when the diversity of life on Earth rapidly multiplied. Applied here, it overlapped perfectly with the project's name, and for a time it became a hot topic in global media. Su-han was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. When he accepted the award, standing at the podium in the Stockholm Concert Hall, he was still wearing that white shirt, no tie. His acceptance speech lasted only 5 minutes. At the end, he said a line that would later be quoted countless times. "The dignity of science does not lie in how many people revere it, but in how many people need it. A technology only truly fulfills its mission when it walks out of the laboratory, through the patent walls, and into the hands of those who need it most." The entire hall rose in a standing ovation. In the audience sat Su Qingyan, Kong Xiaohe, Shen Yubai, Gao Zheng, Zhongqi, and Gu Sun. Su Qingyan wore a dark blue evening gown. Her hair was even shorter than 10 years ago, a few strands of white now at her temples, but her gaze was calmer and more resolute than ever. When she applauded, she wasn't looking at the stage, but at a small brass plaque affixed to the back of the wooden chair in front of her, engraved with the Nobel medallion and the year. No one knew what she was thinking, but Zhongqi, sitting next to her, noticed that her hand resting on her knee was gently rubbing a simple silver ring. Another decade passed. Su-han and Su Qingyan both retired. They lived in an old house in the Swiss countryside, by a lake. Across the water stood the eternally snow-capped Alps. Su-han woke every morning at 6, ran 5 kilometers around the lake, then came home to make breakfast for Su Qingyan. Su Qingyan planted a field of lavender in the yard. Every summer, the purple blossoms spread a fragrance that drifted all the way across the lake. She no longer managed the day-to-day business of Su International, but kept the title of advisor, occasionally hopping on video calls to help the board handle some thorny compliance issues. One winter evening, the two of them sat before the fireplace. The fire crackled and popped. Su Qingyan was curled up on the couch, leafing through a yellowed old book. Su Han sat beside her, a laptop open on his lap, browsing the latest academic papers. He casually clicked into an academic forum called Deep Sea Echoes, a site he had anonymously funded 3 years prior, dedicated to giving young researchers ignored or suppressed by mainstream academia a place to publish. The homepage scrolled with the latest preprints. He scrolled down and found a paper on a novel biomarker for Alzheimer's disease. The data was solid, the conclusions restrained yet exciting. The author's name was one he didn't recognize, Zhang Yubai. He stared at that name for a very long time, then suddenly laughed. Su Qingyan looked up from her book, glancing at him. What's funny? This name, Su Han pointed at the screen. It's Shen Yubai and Zhang Yu mashed together. That guy can't even be bothered to come up with a decent pseudonym. Su Qingyan leaned over to look and laughed too. Your disciples are all continuing your path in their own ways. Su Han closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch, watching the flames in the fireplace. The firelight danced in his pupils like 2 tiny suns. They're not continuing my path, he said. They're walking their own. The most I ever did was help them move a few stones out of the way. 20 years later, Su Han published a memoir. He chose the title himself, The Laboratory Late at Night. The book didn't sensationalize any emotions, didn't rail against any enemies, didn't use a single exclamation mark. He simply wrote down everything that had happened in those years, in an almost eerily calm lab report-like tone. The centrifuge that exploded, the fabricated whistleblower letter, the experiment logbook soaked to pulp and culture medium, Jiang Boning's testimony, Zhao Weijuan's red letterhead document, Zhao Mingji's holographic speech, the Swiss Federal Patent Court's verdict, the open-source declaration at the Palais des Nations, that plate of leek and egg dumplings in Zhangjiago. He wrote it all. The book sparked enormous controversy after publication. Some said he was too merciful to his betrayers, using pseudonyms even for Jiang Boning and Zhao Mingji, refusing to nail them to a pillar of shame. Others said he was too understated about his own suffering. The strongest emotion in the entire book was a single line. I feel regret. At a press conference for the new book, a journalist pointedly asked, Professor Su, your book devotes 2 whole chapters to the technical details of gene therapy and proposals for patent law reform, yet only a single page to Jiang Boning. Have you truly let it go? Su Han looked at the journalist but didn't answer right away. He was silent for so long that the reporters below began exchanging uneasy glances, so long that Kong Xiaohe in the audience furrowed his brow. Then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but the entire conference room was so quiet that even the sound of camera shutters seemed jarring. I haven't let it go, he said. When that centrifuge exploded, the shattered glass cut my right hand. It left a scar. That scar is still there. Every day when I wash my hands I see it. It reminds me that I was once stabbed in the back. But at the same time it reminds me that I survived. Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about not letting that wound continue to dictate your life. It took me nearly 30 years to understand that. The entire room was silent. Many years later, Su Han passed away peacefully in the night. His funeral was a low-key affair. In accordance with his wishes before his death, there was no memorial hall, no formal memorial service, only a simple farewell ceremony held in the old lakeside house where he and Su Qingyan had lived for the greater part of their lives. Not many people came. Su Qingyan, Kong Xiaohe, Shen Yubai, Gao Zheng, Zhongqi, Gu Suan, and a few young scientists he had funded, just over 20 people in all. Su Qingyan, dressed in pure white, stood before his casket and read aloud a passage he had once written on the flyleaf of his lab notebook. It was in tiny handwriting that she needed a magnifying glass to make out, messy but forceful. The ultimate purpose of science is not to discover the truth, but to make the truth useful to humanity. The ultimate purpose of justice is not to punish the guilty, but so that good people who come after won't have to endure the same injustice. This is all that I, Su Han, sought in this life. As for success or failure, praise or blame, it is not worth mentioning to outsiders. She finished reading, closed that yellowed lab notebook, and placed it at a corner of the casket. Then she bent down and gently patted the casket, as if patting the shoulder of an old friend. Go on, she said. The lancet has been wiped clean. The rest of the road the children will walk. Snow began to fall, drifting silently from the gray sky, landing on the lake, on the withered lavender stalks, on the tiled eaves of the old house. Those 20-some people stood in the snow. No one spoke. No one wept. They were simply seeing off in silence a man who had once held a torch in the darkest of nights. That torch did not go out. It split into countless points of light, held in the hands of many more.